He said it like he was announcing the weather, as if telling me my wife was leaving me for him was nothing more than a casual update on tomorrow's forecast. My coffee cup was still in my hand, steam curling from it, when I looked up and saw him standing there, back against the doorframe of my kitchen, one ankle crossed over the other like he owned the place. He had that smug little half-grin that only comes from a man convinced he's won before the game even starts. "She's leaving with me tonight, not you. Deal with it." His voice had that deliberate emphasis, like he was trying to shove the words into me with each syllable. She was behind him, pretending to scroll her phone, though I could see her eyes flick up every few seconds to watch my face. Waiting, hungry for the reaction. Maybe a raised voice, maybe a slammed mug against the counter, maybe even the satisfaction of seeing me shake with rage. The two of them had clearly rehearsed this, his chest puffed out, her feigned disinterest, both playing their little parts in what they thought would be my humiliation. I didn't give them the satisfaction. I let the silence stretch, let them taste it. Then I set the mug down gently on the counter, the sound of ceramic against stone cutting through the room like a blade. I met his eyes and said, evenly, "Noted. No more, no less." He blinked, then laughed, too quickly, too loud. She joined in, that brittle kind of laugh that's meant to reassure the laugher more than anyone else. They thought my calm was surrender, that I'd just been punched in the gut and was too stunned to hit back. They didn't understand that this exact moment, was the point where they'd just stepped into my game without realizing it. I turned away from them like they weren't even worth my gaze, opened the top drawer of my desk in the corner of the living room, and wrapped my fingers around a set of keys. Cold metal, familiar weight. They hadn't left that drawer in over a decade. Keys to a place neither of them knew existed. A building with no name on the front, no mail, no reason for anyone to notice it. It had been my late uncle's, left to me when he passed. I'd never sold it, never rented it, never even spoke about it to anyone. Back then, it had seemed sentimental to keep it. Tonight, it would be strategic. I slipped the keys into my pocket and closed the drawer without a sound. When I turned back toward the kitchen, they were still smirking, still locked in the delusion that I'd just been dethroned in my own house. I gave them nothing, no parting words, no sarcastic jab, no visible crack in my composure. Just walked past them, grabbed my jacket, and left through the front door. The cold air outside hit me like a reset button. I pulled out my phone, scrolled to a name I hadn't dialed in years, and pressed call. It rang twice before a gravelly voice answered. "Didn't think I'd ever hear from you again," he said. I told him where to meet me and what to bring. There was no need for explanations. He knew my tone, and that was enough. By nightfall, I was standing in front of that unmarked building, streetlights flickering overhead. The key turned in the lock with the kind of mechanical click that told me it had been too long since anyone had used it. Inside, the air was stale with decades of dust and old paper. The silence in there wasn't empty. It was loaded, like a room holding its breath. I closed the door behind me, flicked on the light, and took in the rows of locked filing cabinets, the old safe against the back wall, the banker's boxes stacked neatly on metal shelves. Untouched for years. Forgotten by everyone except me. That man in my kitchen thought he'd come into my life tonight and take something that was mine. What he didn't know, and what she didn't know, was that I had the means to take everything from both of them without ever raising my voice. And now, for the first time, I intended to use them. The city was buzzing with Friday night noise, sirens in the distance, bass thumping from passing cars, the occasional drunken shout echoing between brick buildings. But the street I turned onto was quiet, almost forgotten. A single flickering lamppost cast pale light over cracked pavement. I eased my car into a spot across from a squat, nondescript building that most people would walk past without a second glance. No signage, no business hours posted, no sign of life. It had been my late uncle's place, an office that in its prime had seen whispered deals and closed-door negotiations. When he died, it became mine. Everyone assumed I sold it years ago. I never corrected them. Sometimes the best assets are the ones no one remembers you have. The old key slid into the lock, and for a second I thought it might resist after so many years. But it turned with a heavy, mechanical click that echoed in the stillness. I stepped inside, the air thick with dust and the faint scent of aged paper. My footsteps were muffled by the old carpet, faded from sunlight that hadn't touched it in decades. Against the far wall stood 4 tall filing cabinets, their drawers locked with small brass keys still dangling from the locks. To the left, a battered oak desk that had probably been outdated in the 80s. On the right, A heavy safe bolted into the floor, its black paint chipped along the edges. I flicked on the overhead light. It buzzed to life, bathing the room in a harsh yellow glow. Dust motes swirled in the air like lazy snow. The first cabinet was filled with manila folders, neatly labeled in my uncle's precise handwriting. I pulled one at random. Inside were photographs, notarized statements, receipts for transactions that, at a glance, were entirely legal, but put together, could tell stories no one would want told. By the time I reached the second cabinet, my mind had shifted into calculation mode. I wasn't here to just dig through nostalgia. I was building something, an arsenal, one piece at a time. Every file, every document, every scrap of evidence went into one of three piles on the desk: leverage, protection, destruction. Halfway through, my phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from her. "Don't wait up." I stared at it for a moment, my thumb hovering over the screen, before locking the phone and setting it face down on the desk. Let her think I was sitting at home, stewing. Let her believe she'd left me in limbo. The truth was, while she was sipping overpriced drinks and laughing at someone else's jokes, I was already dismantling the ground beneath her feet. I cracked open the safe next. Inside were three leather-bound ledgers, a stack of old bank statements, and, most interestingly, a slim folder with my own name scrawled across it. My uncle had kept things on me, too. Nothing incriminating, but enough to remind me that in his world, everyone was both an ally and a potential opponent. That was a lesson I intended to apply tonight. As the hours slipped by, the piles on the desk grew. My scanner hummed softly, digitizing decades-old paper into files I could move, hide, or unleash as needed. Each beep of a completed scan felt like the quiet tick of a clock counting down, not to midnight, but to the moment they realized the game had shifted. When I finally shut off the light and locked the door behind me, it was after 2 in the morning. The street was still empty. My car door closed with a soft thud, and I sat there for a moment, letting the silence sink in. They had no idea this address existed. No idea what had been set in motion. By the time I started the engine, I'd already decided I wasn't going to confront them. I was going to erase them. And the first moves were already in place. The air outside was sharp and cool when I left the building that morning, a light fog clinging to the edges of the street. My destination was only 10 minutes away, but it felt like a different world. Polished granite facades, mirrored windows, valet stands out front. The kind of place where nobody looked rushed, but everything was urgent. His office was on the top floor, behind a frosted glass door with his name etched in small, understated letters. He was already standing when I walked in, hand extended, the faintest smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Been a while," he said. I didn't waste time with pleasantries. I pulled a thick, sealed envelope from my coat and slid it across the desk. No explanation. No preamble. He broke the seal and began reading. For 5 solid minutes, the only sound in the room was the faint rustle of paper. His eyes moved steadily, unhurried but intent, the way a man reads when he's cataloging every word. Once, he looked up at me, then back down again without speaking. When he finally set the last page aside, he leaned back in his chair and exhaled slowly. "This," he said, tapping the edge of the papers with one finger, "will be decisive." His tone wasn't admiration or judgment. It was assessment, like an architect appraising blueprints for a building designed to withstand earthquakes. We didn't linger. Within minutes, we were drafting the framework. Asset transfers to entities only I controlled, layered protections within family trusts, and one final clause, my clause, that would trigger automatically under specific conditions. It was simple in wording, brutal in effect. As we worked, he didn't ask the kind of questions other lawyers might. Know why, know who's involved, know what happened. That was the advantage of a relationship built over decades. He knew my threshold for action, and that if I was here, it meant the threshold had been crossed. I initialed page after page, the black ink drying in neat strokes. One signature moved the deed for our home into a trust under my sole management. Another shifted the business shares I'd let her brag about at dinner parties into a holding company with no public ties to me. Bank accounts, investments, even the cabin by the lake. Every line item I touched vanished from the shared map of ours and reappeared on the protected map of mine. By the time the last page slid across the desk, the legal landscape of my life had changed entirely. Anything she thought she had a claim to was already gone, placed behind walls she couldn't scale without my permission. And permission would never come. He stood, buttoning his jacket. "I'll file the last set today." By the time anyone even thinks to look, it'll be weeks too late. I shook his hand and left, the weight in my chest shifting from something heavy to something sharp. Outside, the city moved as if nothing had changed. Cars honking, people hurrying with coffee cups in hand. But for her and her smug little accomplice, the foundation had already cracked. They just hadn't heard it yet. By mid-afternoon, I knew exactly where she was and what she was doing. Not because I'd followed her. No, I didn't need to. She was as predictable as a clock, and Fridays always followed the same script. Around 3, she'd stop by her favorite boutique, where the salespeople knew her by name and had already pulled items in her size. Then, she'd swing by the bank to make sure she had fun money for the weekend. The trips had become bolder lately, the withdrawals larger. She assumed I never noticed. So when my phone lit up with her name, I was already smiling before I answered. Her tone came sharp, almost metallic. "My card got declined," she snapped, skipping over any pretense of a greeting. "What's going on?" I could picture it perfectly. Her standing at the counter in that little boutique, a credit card still in the reader, the clerk trying not to make eye contact. A line of people behind her, watching. Her cheeks flushed, not with embarrassment, but with the simmering rage of someone who's just been reminded they don't control the situation. "Maybe try another card," I said casually. She must have already done it, because there was a pause before she bit out. "I did. 2 more. Declined. Every single one." I let a beat pass, just enough to let her hear the low hum of traffic on my end of the line. Then I said, "Ask him to cover it," and hung up. No yelling, no explanation. Just that. I slid my phone back into my jacket pocket and walked up the marble steps of the bank. Inside, the air was cool and still, the quiet broken only by the soft clack of keyboards and the faint squeak of leather shoes on polished tile. The branch manager was already waiting, an older man who greeted me with a polite, "Right this way, Mr. Carter." In a small glass-walled office at the back, a single sheet of paper lay on the desk, already prepared. My pen moved across the line in one smooth motion. With that signature, every joint account we'd shared was closed, the balances transferred into accounts solely in my name. Accounts she didn't even know existed. The manager slid my copy into a folder and handed it over with both hands, his expression neutral, professional. But I could feel the quiet finality in the act. In less than a minute, I'd cut off her access to every dollar she thought was hers by default. As I walked out into the sunlight, I imagined the next phase, the moment she'd call him, her new man, and ask for a bailout. I wondered if he'd hesitate before opening his wallet, or if he'd pretend not to mind while calculating just how expensive she'd become in 48 hours. Either way, I wasn't going to hear about it firsthand. My role in that scene was done. From here on out, I'd give her nothing. No explanations, no warnings, no acknowledgement. Her next move would be all noise. Mine would remain pure silence. It was almost midnight when I parked a block away from his building. The street was quiet, save for the hum of a distant generator and the occasional hiss of tires over damp asphalt. The place he called home was one of those modern, soulless apartment complexes, glass, steel, and concrete stacked into neat boxes, each one pretending to be unique. I knew they wouldn't be there. Friday nights meant they'd be out late, drinking, laughing, wrapped in that giddy confidence of people who think tomorrow will be just as easy as today. The package sat on the passenger seat beside me, heavier than it looked. Plain brown wrapping, taped carefully, no return address. If you passed it in a hallway, you wouldn't give it a second glance. But inside was weight far beyond paper. The first bundle, printed transcripts of every text they'd exchanged for the last 8 months. I hadn't hacked anything, hadn't needed to. Sometimes people are careless. Sometimes they forget old accounts stay synced. Sometimes they underestimate what deleted really means. Every emoji, every late-night whisper sent through a glowing screen, preserved in black and white. Her little jokes at my expense. His smug reassurances. Plans. Photos. A digital love affair made physical, bound together with a single binder clip. The second bundle was thinner, but it was the blade hidden in the box. A scanned, notarized copy of her own handwriting. An admission she'd once made to me in a moment of panic years ago, when she'd needed my help to make it go away. She'd made a financial mistake, as she called it, one that could have ended her career if it ever surfaced. I'd buried it for her then. Tonight, I was digging it back up. I didn't add a note. Notes are for messages, and this wasn't a message. It was a mirror, a reflection of who they really were, set down in ink for them to confront without spin or denial. I stepped out of the car, and walked the block, the package under my arm. The building's front door was locked, but I didn't need it. There was a side entrance through the parking garage that someone had propped open with a brick. Inside, the air was warmer, carrying the faint scent of bleach from an earlier cleaning. His apartment was on the third floor, down a hallway lined with identical doors. I stopped at his, crouched, and set the package neatly against it. For a moment, I just stood there, looking at the number. There's a certain quiet satisfaction in placing something exactly where it needs to be, knowing it will land exactly how you intend. Then I turned and walked away, slow and deliberate, letting my footsteps echo down the hall. By the time I reached my car, the night air felt lighter, cleaner. Back home, I poured myself a drink and sat by the window. The city was still alive out there, distant sirens, the faint murmur of traffic, but in my apartment, it was silent. I didn't check my phone. I didn't imagine their reaction. That wasn't the point. The point was that the weight I'd been carrying for months was now sitting on his doorstep, waiting like a loaded gun with no safety. And for the first time in weeks, I slept without waking once. The sun had barely cleared the rooftops when he shuffled out into the hallway, hair sticking up in lazy tufts, a mug of coffee steaming in his free hand. He wasn't expecting anything. Maybe a neighbor's delivery left at the wrong door, maybe the usual junk mail shoved under the mat. But when his eyes landed on the package, his pace slowed. It was plain, unmarked, too neatly placed to have been dropped there by accident. He crouched, picked it up, and turned it over in his hands. No address, no handwriting, just the weight of it. The door clicked shut behind him, and I could almost picture the scene inside. Him setting the coffee down on the kitchen counter, using a thumb to tear the tape, the flap peeling back to reveal the first neat stack of paper. He would have flipped to the top page without thinking, expecting instructions, or maybe a note. Instead, the first words would have been his own, snatched from some late-night conversation he'd thought was private, printed in crisp, inescapable black ink. By the halfway point of that first page, the color would have drained from his face. Not from shame. Men like him don't feel shame in the usual sense, but from calculation. The mental scramble of someone realizing the scope of what they're holding. Every crude joke, every insult, every intimate photo. And then he'd turn the page, and his world would tilt. Because it wasn't just about them anymore. The second stack, the thinner one, would feel different in his hands, denser, heavier in consequence. His name threaded through her confession, each mention tying him directly to the financial mess she'd made years ago. Dates, amounts, internal memos. Enough to suggest not just complicity, but active participation. By the end of that page, his fingers would tremble. Not because of morality, he'd left that behind long ago, but because he'd know instantly what this could mean if it ever saw the wrong desk. Jobs lost. Licenses revoked. Charges filed. From that moment on, whatever small thrill he'd taken in standing in my kitchen, tossing that challenge in my face, would be gone. That victory night of his, of theirs, would shrink into nothing under the shadow of what he'd just read. And he wouldn't even know yet that this was just the opening move. She called 2 days later, her voice coated in that manufactured warmth she always used when she wanted to steer the conversation without resistance. "We should talk," she said, like it was an olive branch instead of a hook. I didn't ask where. Let her choose the ground. It wouldn't matter. She picked a quiet restaurant on the edge of downtown, the kind of place where the music was soft and the waiters moved like they were trained not to disturb the air. I arrived a few minutes early, claimed a booth in the back, and ordered water. When she walked in, she wore a shade of red I'd seen her reserve for special occasions, hair pinned just so, a faint perfume that lingered before she even slid into the seat across from me. For the first few minutes, it was all nostalgia. Little stories about the early days, shared vacations, the time the power went out in the cabin and we made dinner by candlelight. She spoke in the tone of someone laying bricks, trying to build a bridge she'd already burned to the ground. I nodded occasionally, let her fill the air. I'd learned long ago that silence can be more unnerving than any question. Halfway through her salad, she leaned in slightly, eyes softening in that calculated way she used when she wanted to sell sincerity. Her hand drifted across the table, palm up, fingertips brushing against mine. I let her touch linger for just a second before I reached down to my briefcase beside me and slid a thick, cream-colored envelope onto the table. She glanced at it, then at me. "What's this? Something you might want to read?" I said. She opened it there, right in front of me, pulling out a single-page statement. At first, her eyes skimmed with the casual curiosity of someone expecting something routine. Then they stopped moving. The page was from his landlord, a formal notice, signed and dated, terminating his lease effective immediately. The reason? Legal complications under investigation. The subtext was there for anyone who knew how to read between the lines. Her fork, midair, froze. She blinked twice, scanning the page again like she'd somehow missed the part that mattered most. "He's moving?" she asked finally, her voice smaller now, stripped of that smooth edge she'd walked in with. I didn't answer. I just looked at her, calm, letting the weight of the question settle in the space between us. I could see it, the faint tightening around her mouth, the shift in her posture, the way her eyes flickered down and away before snapping back to mine. The mask was cracking, and she knew it. The waiter came by to refill our water glasses, and I leaned back in my seat, watching her set the paper down next to her untouched plate. She didn't pick up her fork again, and I didn't give her anything. Not a confirmation, not a denial, not even a change in expression. Some answers are worth more when you never give them. By the next morning, it was already moving through the grapevine like smoke through a dry forest. The kind of story that travels without anyone admitting they've told it. I didn't need to plant anything. The papers in that package had done all the work for me. People in his orbit didn't stay quiet long, not when there was an opening to distance themselves from someone radioactive. His call came first. The name flashing on my phone made me pause mid-sip of coffee. I let it ring twice before answering. He started with volume, accusations, threats, that brittle bluster men use when they're already on the defensive. I didn't say a word. I just let him burn through it. Somewhere between the third and fourth insult, his tone shifted. The anger bled out, replaced by something tight and strained. "Look," he said, there's been a misunderstanding. Maybe we can." I hung up. An hour later, there was a knock at my door. She stood there, hair pulled back like she'd rushed over, wearing that expression I'd seen her practice in bathroom mirrors, half concern, half innocence. "He misunderstood everything," she said before I could open my mouth. "It's not what you think." I stepped aside just enough for her to take in the apartment behind me. Boxes stacked neatly by the wall, shelves already bare. "You made your choice," I said, voice even. "So did I." Something flickered in her eyes then. Not guilt, not even regret, but the recognition that there was no road back from here. She didn't try to follow me inside. She didn't ask where I was going. She just stood there in the hallway as I closed the door. That night, I loaded the last of my things into the back of my car and drove across town to my uncle's old place. The lock turned smoothly, like it had been waiting for me. Inside, the air still held that faint scent of dust and paper, but it felt different now. Not like a hiding place, but like a base. As I unpacked, I realized it didn't feel like I was leaving anything behind. It felt like I was reclaiming something I should never have let slip. For walls that were mine, a door they didn't have a key to, and silence that no one could fill but me. Outside, the city kept moving. Inside, I was already thinking about the next move. It was almost poetic how he found out. Not from me, of course. He wasn't going to get the courtesy of a warning. He heard it from his own landlord, a man who had probably been itching for years to deliver news like this to someone so sure of his own permanence. The call came mid-morning, right when his cafe/workshop was in that lull between the early rush and the lunch crowd. I imagine him wiping his hands on a rag, still thinking about inventory orders or whatever small worries a man like him mistakes for control. The landlord didn't waste time. The building has been sold. The buyer? A private family trust. Effective immediately, rent was tripled, with payment due in 30 days or the space would be reclaimed. He asked the landlord for the name of the new owner, probably expecting some faceless real estate conglomerate he could hate in the abstract. Instead, he heard my last name. My family's trust. I wish I could have seen his face in that exact second. The moment his jaw slackened, the little line between his brows deepened, the calculation starting and stalling all at once. Because this wasn't just a financial hit. This was a noose tightening, one that had been looped around his neck the moment he leaned against my kitchen doorway and told me to deal with it. The truth is, the purchase had been in motion for days before that night, just waiting for me to pull the trigger. The second he gave me his smirk and those 6 words, I knew exactly where to aim. The building had been undervalued for years, the previous owner eager to cash out. A few signatures, a wire transfer, and the deed was sitting in a fireproof box at my lawyer's office. On paper, it wasn't personal, it was just business. But both of us knew better. While he scrambled to call in favors, I was sitting at my uncle's old desk, reviewing the lease agreement I now controlled. The terms were ironclad, the penalties severe. Triple rent was generous, really. I could have given him 2 weeks. I could have ended the lease outright. But no, 30 days would be better. Long enough for hope to flicker, for him to think there might be a way out, and short enough for reality to crush it before he could gather the money. The same man who thought taking her from me would be some kind of victory now faced losing the roof over his livelihood. And unlike him, I didn't need to raise my voice to make it happen. He'd told me to deal with it. Now, standing in a building with my name on the title and his business inside, I was watching him learn what dealing with it really looked like. It was a gray morning, the kind where the air feels heavy even before the rain starts. I was coming down the courthouse steps after a short meeting with my attorney when I saw him across the plaza. He looked smaller somehow, shoulders hunched, suit hanging loose like it had been bought for a bigger man in better times. In his left hand was a crumpled stack of papers, creased and spotted from being handled too much. His right hand was in his pocket, fingers twitching like he couldn't decide whether to pull them out or keep them hidden. Our eyes met before he could look away. He started toward me, hesitant at first, then faster, like momentum had taken over. By the time he reached the bottom of the steps, I could see the exhaustion in his face, the deep lines carved from sleepless nights, the red in his eyes that had nothing to do with wind. He opened his mouth. Listen, I didn't give him the chance. From the inside pocket of my jacket, I pulled a single, folded document and held it out to him. No dramatic pause, no explanation, just paper meeting air. He took it slowly, unfolding it right there. His eyes scanned the first line, then the second. His mouth tightened. By the time he reached the signature at the bottom, his grip had whitened on the page. It was his official eviction notice. Final date set. No extensions, no appeals left. By law, the space he'd built his small business in was no longer his after 30 days. And we both knew he couldn't last 30 more hours in this kind of freefall. I didn't threaten him. I didn't gloat. I didn't offer him the hollow comfort of a conversation. This wasn't about winning an argument. This was about closing a file. I stepped past him without a word, the sound of my shoes sharp against the wet pavement. A few steps later, the reflection in a shop window caught my attention, not mine, but his. Standing there on the courthouse steps, holding the notice like it was heavier than it should have been, watching me walk away with nothing left in his hands. Some battles aren't won with fists. They're won with patience and precision. And in that moment, I knew I'd never need to see him again.